Hey, Safer here. 1917 was truly a great film. Not just for fun or how good it looks. That's surface stuff. Everyone is talking about how this film was made to look like it's done in one shot. But I haven't seen anybody realize that's not just for effect. It serves a point that the film is making about the history of World War I, and it really evokes that feeling in a way we haven't seen before. There hasn't been a good World War I film since Beneath Hill 60 in 2010. Good films about this time evoke a sense of despair, and this one brings something new to the table. Now, 1917 is mostly fictional, being loosely based on a story that the director's grandfather told him. But it's completely different from that story. Alfred Mendes famously ran out into no man's land during the Battle of Passchendaele to find numerous missing and wounded soldiers, for which he earned the British Military Medal. He also ferried messages, often in dangerous circumstances, since he had some signals experience. That's the limited basis of this film, and Sam Mendes built a lot from that granule of truth. And to talk about it, I'm going to have to go into spoilers, so you've been warned. Right from the get-go, we see a big change from the original story. It starts with two main characters, though eventually narrows down to one. They are ordered to deliver an urgent message to stop a charge into a German trap. The Germans retreated to strategic positions a few miles behind their original lines, kind of like the real-life Operation Albrecht, where German soldiers retreated to their more fortified Hindenburg line in February and March of 1917, where they readied to withstand British and French assaults with less casualties. So the character duo have to trudge through an odyssey of the Western Front to deliver the message and avert disaster. As soon as we meet officers, we're greeted with their characteristic attitude that cost so many lives during the war.
Kind of no man's land. You'll cross there.
It'll be daylight, sir. They'll see us.
There's no need to be concerned. You should meet no resistance.
And through this odyssey, we really see the nasty world of trench warfare, but also how those trenches were sometimes more dynamic than they seem. Perhaps the amount of bodies is a bit overblown, but maybe it's alluding to the sapper mine detonations that happened at other times. It's fictional, so we don't have any specifics. Though there is a Mark IV tank here, despite the film taking place a month before their first deployment, but who cares? Just pretend it's a Mark I. That level of accuracy doesn't matter, especially with equipment. That silly level of nitpicking is for gamers or whatever, not historians. We care about narrative. Now there's a part where one of the duo gets stabbed by a German pilot they just saved from a burning wreck, and I've seen folks saying that's incorrect, but it's perfectly feasible, and that's what truly matters with fiction, whether or not it could happen. What isn't feasible is when we run into a British convoy behind the old German lines. If this could happen, why didn't the message get sent with them? Perhaps they were waiting on the duo's signal via flare? But if there were truly perfectly good roads to take, why did they go through the enemy mines? It doesn't make sense. But we only see this for a little while before getting to an interesting portrayal for a World War I flick: urban combat. To cover their retreat, just like in real life, the Germans left a bunch of pickets in one of the destroyed cities, and our protagonist has to get through that city. During this sequence, we see the consequences of this war on the Belgian civilians stuck in the middle of it, which is something all too easily forgotten in these movies. Once we finally catch up to the British unit doomed to charge into a trap, there's a bit of squabbling with the commander there because the attack has already commenced, which is pretty accurate, at least in the way that officers worked in the British military. Then the protagonist goes through the makeshift hospital and some plot stuff before we end here. Now you might already know this film was made to look like it's all one continuous shot, like Hitchcock's Rope or Iñárritu's Birdmen, and it's really a sight to behold. Think about it. Those other two movies were pretty confined films, mostly shot indoors, while this is completely outdoors and filmed on locations that are sometimes hundreds of miles apart. Like principal filming was on the Salisbury Plain, Bovington, Durham, and Glasgow. Yeah, that's a lot of distance to cover in one shot. Obviously, they disguise the cuts, and often pretty effectively. It's really hard to control for the weather, and yet somehow they make it work. Now that's all fancy camera work and whatnot, but there's more to it than mere spectacle.
And there is no better way to tell this story than with one continuous shot.
It serves a narrative purpose. Remember where he ended the journey? Okay, hold on. Where did he begin? Oh, I see. It's a loop. This is filmed like it's continuous, as though when he falls asleep at the end, he could just wake up and do it again. The one-shot camera work reinforces that continuity. That's freaking amazing. And actually, it serves an even greater purpose. The Western Front of the Great War is not remembered for being, if you'll pardon the pun, a great war. Most of the battles were fought over tiny slivers of land. The front barely moved. 2 long lines of fortifications created the front, and that front changed very little for years. That stalemate was what 1917 really felt like for everyone involved. They didn't pick that time frame for no reason. The US had officially joined the war right around when this movie is supposed to take place, but Americans wouldn't start arriving en masse until the following year, and Russia at the same time was losing in the east. Germany pushed the Russians into Ukraine in order to knock them out of the war, which came in March the following year, meaning Germany successfully invaded Russia in the winter, contrary to the popular belief of that being impossible. What this meant for the Western Front is that the British and French couldn't get the reinforcements they needed quickly enough to stop the Germans from eventually refocusing on the West. It was a long and grueling year. So this cyclical movie shows the war's cyclical nature in 1917. The constant push for territory without gains, the needless fighting over fortifications, the wanton destruction of Belgian infrastructure, and the hopeless soldiering of the enlisted. It's a great World War I flick, right up there with Paths of Glory or All Quiet on the Western Front. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.